there, this is Elliot Lothrop from Building Heritage. I'm here today to show you how to cut a halved and bladed scarf joint. That's a scarf joint that is going to, the backside of this post in this case is going to be removed, and the new wood will go up behind the old, and it will extend the post back to its original length. We'll give you a quick tour of the shop here. We can go over some of the tools that are going to be used in the process, and then we'll get into layout. So here's a couple different things. There's a chain mortiser, hand plane, slick chisels, hand saw, nice pole saw. Got a variety of different blades for that guy. Big Al layout tool, 8 1/4 circular saw, impact driver, wood owl bit on a short wood owl bit just to kind of finish out drilling through on the backside of stuff. Lots of different tools for drawing lines, cleaning up timbers, pulling nails, multi-master tool, end sealer for sealing up the end grain of the new wood to make sure it doesn't dry too quickly. Got a cordless hole hog here for some fully threaded screws if we need to put those in for structural reasons. These are pullers here that are going to pull the joint together and push it apart and help me to get everything perfectly tight on all the different surfaces. Got a little mini sledge there and a peg driver to drive on any pegs, and a big beam planer there. The circular saw, 16-inch circular saw, Sasquatch, super Sasquatch. And yeah, we'll go through and lay out timber. We'll go through the process of cleaning up the timber and laying out a halved and bladed scarf joint here on the bottom of this post. So I'm just going to go through real quickly. There are a couple staples here. I'm just pulling out with call these bullnose pliers. They're great for cleanly pulling out nails. If you need to get a screwdriver underneath the staple and then pull this out, but it makes it so you really don't mar the face of the timber up. And I usually have a whole bucket of nails that get thrown out and keep everything clean. Just gonna go through the surface real quick with a wire brush. I also have a wire brush on a wheel on a wheel sander that I'll go through probably after and do the whole post just to clean everything up. I do it right now, but it just creates a big cloud of dust and nastiness. Usually wear a respirator for that one. So I've got my surface cleaned off. This post is pretty good on the bottom. It's been cut here more recently, not by myself, but by some folks that had already moved this barn before. So I know that the bottom of the post is in good condition. It's just not long enough to go back up, and so I need to extend some length onto it. This is actually going back up as a house, and so sometimes on projects I'll want to preserve every amount of wood possible. In this case, I also have to kind of think about the aesthetics of the building. So one of the things I try to look at when I'm laying out a repair, I'm going to peg the two pieces together. So I also want to be conscious of where there's existing joinery. In this case, what we've got are a descending brace. So this post stands up like this. This is a descending brace that would go from the post down to the sill. This is a mortise for a girt, a horizontal girt or nailer. The braces aren't going back in because there aren't going to be sills on this thing. The girts are going to be in there. And so what I'm looking at here are these two pegs. Do I try to incorporate that then into my scarf repair? And I'm also going to have, even though I might not use this mortise, might not put this mortise back in there, I will have these two peg holes on the front surface. So what I'm going to do is, and this will be different for every case, but center to center on that is 13 inches. Backing up a little bit, on the length of the half and bladed scarf, the rule of thumb that I like to use is the length of the scarf joint is going to be 4 times the width. So these are all roughly 8 inches, 8.5 inches. So I've been making everything 32 inches long. So again, we got 32 inches minus 13, so we're at 19 inches, and so I'm just going to come whatever that is, 9.5 inches off of each side. I'll just go this way first to start, 9.5 inches up to start there, and that way I'll have a 32-inch long scarf joint, and then these 4 peg holes will be centered on the length of it, and those will both lock it together, and then these 2 will actually be used for that girth. So also backing up a little bit, assuming you guys know about square rule a little. If we don't, we can follow this up with some stuff about that if needed. But this is obviously a square rule frame. There are housings here. Real easy way to identify your reference faces are, everything's laid out inch and a half. So I know that this is a reference face. Also, because there's no barn, it's got a paint ghost line on this side. So I know this is an outside face, and what is the bottom now is an outside face. So as I do my layout with my framing square, I'm going to lay everything out off of these reference faces. And so I guess I'll take you through drawing it out, and then we'll kind of zoom in on what that looks like. But in this case, I'm just going to start up at the top. And what I'm doing here is the old piece is going to be longer on the inside face. This is the outside, this is the inside. So it's going to be longer on the inside face, and the new wood's going to come up the back side. So what I'm going to do here is I'm starting at the very top point. So I'm going to go, goes from 2 inches to 4 inches. So I'm going to draw a line across 2 inches to 4 inches. And then I'm going to make a tick at 2 and a tick at 4 on the end here. So it's going to give me my width on my tenon on my cog there at the end. And then I'm also going to make a tick at 2 inches on the 2-inch blade of the framing square. And then I'm going to slide the framing square to that 2-inch tick that I just made. And I'm going to make a line from 0 to 2. And I'm going to make a little tick at 2. And I'm going to connect those 2 ticks that are at 2. And I've got one at 4, and I'm just going to hold on to that one. Now I'm going to draw the length of my joint. What I like to do with the length is to extend the tape measure all the way out, burn an inch. So putting the tape measure at 1 inch. I like to make sure I think through in my head. I say, well, it's 32 inches long. I'm going to draw 33. 33 is the line I'm going to draw over here. You don't want to lose that inch. Draw my line at 32. Sorry, 33. And bring the framing square again. Down here, sometimes you got to move it around to find a good flat surface depending on the hewing. Got a big bulge right there. So sliding to that mark. And I'm going to go here, I'm going to go from 4 to 6 inches across. And I'm going to make a tick at 4. And I'm going to make a tick at 6. And then I'm going to make another tick on the 2-inch blade here at 2. And I'm going to slide framing square up there. And I'm going to go from 6 to the end. And sometimes here you got to very carefully, I got a lot of wane on the corner. You very carefully try to line up where that comes around and draw it down below the plane so that I can extend that line around on that surface. Oh, and I messed up. Also need to make a tick at the 6-inch mark here. And then extend those 2. One thing I'm seeing here, those 2, because of the little rocking and rolling I had there, those 2 lines at 6 inches don't quite seem right. So I'm going to ignore that for now. I'm not going to draw that line across. For the thickness of that, what I'm going to do is to draw the length of the joint at the 4 inch. Got a good straight edge here. And I feel good about where those 2 4-inch points are. And even if it's off by a little if I draw this line on there and then reference everything off of this line, I will know that it is in the right place off of this line, at least off of a 4-inch mark. One second, off my lead. Just gonna draw that line just a little bit more, like got caught in all these checks, and go all the way through here. And again, the wire brushing, doing that ahead of time is kind of nice because it's very nice because you can see these lines a lot better, especially on the darkish wood. And so I've got my 4-inch line drawn all the way across the length. Now what I can do is put the 2-inch bar along that length, coming pretty far up it. And so now, instead of using the 6-inch marks that weren't quite right, I'm going off of the 4-inch line and I'm saying this is where 6 inches is relative to that 4-inch mark, instead of hoping that the framing square is in the same place. And sure enough, the two marks are where I had made the mark going this way is off by about 1/8 of an inch. So I feel good about that. So what we do, go in here, lumber crayon, marking the waist so there's no confusion. I'm going to go ahead and lay this out on all the sides, and then we'll zoom in to kind of show you what this all looks like. What I'm going to do now is roll this way. And again, now the reference side, the other reference side is on this face. So always going off the reference side and just drawing my top line around here. This is the shoulder, not really actually the top line, so the shoulder is going to be 2 inches below the longest point, that cog on the top. And so there's a couple, as we're going through cutting, there's a couple different ones to be really careful of. This one, the depth as you cut it doesn't really matter because you're cutting, you're just cutting this bit, but then you're cutting into the waist, doesn't matter too much. The other one is really important to cut the right depth, obviously, because that's the shoulder of your tenon, your cog on the bottom. And so, rolling this around, another quick wire brush, this face. And then, same process, so I've got my line there. I'm just going to make a little tick up on the top so I can see it really well with the framing square. And line across from 0 to 2. And I'll mark at 2. And I'm going to slide my framing square up so that that line that I drew is now at 2. And I'm going to mark the very top point, because this one again was just the shoulder. I'm going to mark the very top point. I'm going to go across from 2 inches to 4 inches. And then I'm going to connect my 2-inch line, two 2-inch lines. And then we go down. Again, burning 1, marking 33. 32-inch length. bottom. And then marking from 4 to 6. And then I will mark it at 2 here on the 2-inch bar. And then I will draw, again, I'm having the same thing though, same little rotational thing. So I'm going to go back to this. I got my mark at 4, my mark at 6. And so my line across at 4 inches. That as a reference line instead of trying to get a straight line off of that face right here. And so coming up there, and I think what I will do, I did not mark, oh no I did, sorry, the up 2 inches, so I'll bring that around. And that will be the shoulder. It's lower cog. And the last one, rotating it around just to see. Hopefully those two, as they come around, hopefully those two are relatively square to each other. Again, I'm looking for the reference face. So I've got my mark there. Just gonna make sure I can see it as it comes around the wane. And I've got my other mark here. Does not look very square, but there's also a lot of chewing and wane and such that's happened here. So sometimes it's best just to connect the dots. So we'll start with that. So I'm just connecting the dot from there to the dot over here. Very much not square. So what I will do, let me go with the length over on the first side that I had drawn. So unless you kind of have to make up as you go along too, in case you hadn't noticed. Beauty is the old piece turns out how it turns out, and you just have to cut the new piece to fit it. So sometimes if things are off a bit, it all works out. Well, it always all works out. But, so I have my line there that wasn't quite right. I'm just going to scribble that out a bit, not too heavily. It'll still be there in the end, so I just want to make sure I don't accidentally cut it, but want to make sure I can wire brush it off at the end. So we will go through, mark some more of that with a lumber crayon. So let me just bring you in there so you can see. What that all look like. So there's the top cog. A little hard to make out the 4-inch line here. There is the other, sorry. There you go. See if it's a little clearer on the other side. So again, the 4-inch line is kind of the critical one. trying to get that nice, you know, making sure that that 4-inch number when you come up with it with the framing square is in the right place, and then being able to use that as a reference, because that's the critical part of it. And I'm just gonna stop this real quick. It seemed like maybe part of that last bit wasn't recording properly, and we'll get back at setting up to cut this. We're gonna get started cutting here. A couple little things first. I'm gonna do the inside corner here, the sort of mortise, so to speak, of the piece with a whole hog. No matter what I do, I guess, with a chain mortiser, I don't use a chain mortiser on old wood. I try to only use it on new wood, just because I don't want to hit a nail accidentally. But anytime drilling or chain mortising, cut the end grain first just by punching that with a chisel. Just going to do that on both of these spaces that are going to get the whole hog. Just going to do those both first, because that also helps me to see the line that I'm going to come across and cut with the circular saw. Every once in a great while you can't see that line well enough, and all of a sudden you've gone farther than that point and you don't realize it until it's too late. So now I've got those 2 points marked, which will come into play later. I like to do the cutting first and then drill the hole out later. Just grabbing a respirator. One of the things I've taken to, we'll leave the fan off for now. I've also got a air filter in here, but one of the things I've taken to, especially with this old spruce in this case, is to wear a respirator. So I'm going to throw that on. What I'm going to do is to grab the 16-inch circular saw. We're obviously on the long face here that shows the joint. I like to start with that. What I'm going to do first, because there's a foot or so of old wood below where my joint starts, I'm actually going to make a rough cut first, just to get it closer to that point so that I'm not making a longer rip, and so that I'm closer to the point where I can actually start seeing my line, since I didn't extend the line down there. And so when I make that cut, I'm just going to stay an inch or two below the end there, just to make sure. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the respirator on. Won't be talking through the process as much, you won't be able to hear me, but it'll be pretty obvious. Just going to go through, do the different stuff with the circular saws, and then we'll get into the whole hog after that.
So, respirator, safety glasses. Make sure I can see out of my safety glasses, so try to keep a paper towel on me. And your cover. So I'm just going to make this rough cut on the bottom, double, triple check where I am. Power is not plugged in yet. Hit it. That happens every day. Alright, so, double checking again. Line that up. Now, I'm gonna make this top cut. The depth isn't critical here. We're cutting into the waist. I'm just going to pick that up a touch. Drop that back down a little. Try to cut through just a little more than halfway. Somewhere there. Alright, so long cut.
The cuts and circular saw are done. Gonna go in and do the inside cog here with the whole hog. This is a quarter whole hog set up with a self-feed bit. It's a 2-inch self-feed bit. Some people will call it a Forstner bit, but a Forstner bit doesn't have the lead screw there. But a pretty essential tool to have. I'd like to make sure I use this guy on any old wood and then save the chain mortiser for new wood, just to make sure that I don't destroy the chain on that guy. So I try to rotate this thing around when it gets started to make sure that that the open part of the bit is down here at the bottom, so I can make sure that I can see both of the sides and the end. Obviously being really careful when I hold the bit like that, not to have my hand anywhere near the trigger. So I'm all lined up nicely. I want to make sure that I'm not too far that way because it will blow out the chip there. Again, that's why I scored the line across. So I'm going to go in about halfway, ultimately, with the whole hog. But one thing with the self-feed bit, you don't want to go in too far. So I'm going to go in, the bit's buried about an inch or two, turn it reverse, pull the chips out. If you bury the thing, with too many chips behind it, it becomes impossible to pull out. Especially the deeper you get into the post and the easier it is to kind of get carried away with your depth, the harder it then becomes to pull out. Sometimes it'll feel like it's not cutting when you do that, and you have to, again, figure way away from the trigger, pull out of the chips. They're then blocking the cutting edge. I'm going to go just a little bit more. I'm going to roll the post over twice. Same thing. And all lined up. So when the two connect in the middle, it does give a bit of a kick on the whole hog. One thing with the whole hog is to make sure to always use the handle and always be in a good body position with it. Anyone that I've ever worked with, and myself included, has been hit by the whole hog before, been thrown by one. So incredibly useful tool, but one to use with some amount of caution. There you go. So plunge through. Actually felt like the two holes lined up pretty well. Didn't pull too hard. Set that down. So ideally, if my cut's lined up on the rip here, which they did, there is just the semicircle of the kerf of the saw cut there that's still connecting the two. And so I'm going to go in with the flat of the chisel against the backside there, and I'm going to split that off. Try not to use the chisel as a wedge, as a pry bar, but because it was a good clean cut, the two sides lined up pretty well. Not only a prying necessary, if it feels like it's holding on a lot, or if the two cuts don't line up, it's important to kind of go in carefully and maybe use a beater chisel to kind of start to work down the length of it and try to split it, and sometimes from both sides. If the two cuts don't line up perfectly, not to worry about too much. You can always make the replacement piece fit. You just need to connect the dots and make sure that it's not high in the middle. But we'll go over all that. So now I've got this part roughed out. The last bit, I guess I'll go ahead and do that now. Sometimes I'll go ahead and do the inside first, but we'll do this last bit now so we can be done with power tools. So I'm going to rotate that around. And so I made my rough cut on the end here initially with the big saw. So that's out here. The actual end of the tenon of the cog is back in there. So I'm just going to make that mark on the top here. If this cut was off, I would go ahead and smooth this out first, but it's pretty good, and so I feel good about running the big saw over that. So what I'm going to do is draw that line across on the top here, and I'm going to use the table of the scarf joint to run the saw along. Now I'm going to come in on the end and draw that thickness. Should be 2 inches. Double check. You can also kind of use the blade. Framing square there. Don't want to stick with my layout. Hypothetically, if I connect those two corners, it will be the same thing. But I'm going to use my lines I just made. I'm going to line around the corner so I can hold my framing square down there. It's a little easier to press on and be able to see the line. Draw my line across. So that's one to be really careful with as we cut that. Both in not making this too thin accidentally, so I'm going to actually stay below that line a good bit, and also making sure that the depth isn't too deep, making sure that I stay back a bit from that shoulder, so that I'm not going too deep in the old piece. So I'm going to go ahead and use my 8 1/4 saw for this. I'm going to hold it on the side so I can check my depth. Again, I'm going to come solid 3/16, maybe an inch or 1/8 of an inch back from that line. And I'm going to get down so I can see that line really well. And I'm going to, as I come across, I'm going to cut. I'm going to stay about 1/8 of an inch below that line as I cut across, just in case the end isn't perfectly square. I don't want the blade to be tipped up a little bit and cutting. same thing. Just hold this on the side. Check my depth. Quite good. Should be about the same. They should both be cutting it about 1 7/8 inch depth. Again, this is where I have my extra line, so I'm just going to double check, make sure I'm cutting the correct line. I do like to group everything together so I can be done with my power tools all at the same time, done with safety glasses, done with the earmuffs, and then into the hand tools. So my go-to chisels, I have a 2-inch bar that I really love. Bar chisels are awesome. You guys might be familiar with those. And then I also have just a random, so I picked up at an antique store, 3/4 inch chisel that's just thin. The angle's laid back on it a bit, and I think because it just takes out a little bit of wood because it's 3/4 of an inch, it just always stays nice and sharp, and it's really great for cutting through end grain. So I'll start with this guy, just since we're on that surface still. Get rid of the waste. Now I'm just going to use my chisel to get down to the line. So I want to see. I'm always really focused on the visible parts of the joint. Obviously the whole joint has to be good, tight, because otherwise it's not structurally sound, but it's also important for the visible faces of this thing to look good and for all of the surfaces to be tight and not gapped and ugly. So as I come around, I'm really paying attention, especially to the show faces. So the, this surface and what is the bottom now are the reference sides. So those will be the outside. This face and this face are both going to be visible. So just being really aware of those, just so it's aesthetically pleasing. So now I'm going to come across, again, starting on the outside face here. I was about 1/8 of an inch high on that line, so it wouldn't be too deep there. And now I'm just coming across where my actual layout line is. So I'm just starting that on the outside, so that's exactly where I want it. And then I'll pair across roughly to the middle. And if anything, I'm going to give this thing a little bit of a belly, just so it's not high in the middle. Come across other side, same thing. Okay, and then I can't see, but from this side, all right, and so looks good to my eye. Put the framing square on it, drag that along, make sure that it's not touching the middle. A little high right here. One little trick I like to do sometimes, it stays on there for quite a while, is to rub a little graphite on the bar there. So as you slide it across, it's going to mark where it's touching. Just a good little cheat. Obviously, you just want that ideally just on your very outside edges. not in the middle. One last time. And it's good. All right, so flip this around. I like to start when I do the inside corner here with a 3/4 inch chisel. Again, show surface here. I want this to look really good. Big thing for me is to not take too much wood out at one time, especially as you're at the top here. So I really want to focus on creating my line. So I'm going from where that whole hog came through and is a 2-inch circle and turning that into a 2-inch square. So I'm going to come along parallel with the grain, just scoring that right on my line just to make sure that's good. And then I'm going to go to the end grain and I'm just going to make sure that first all the way in is good, but I'm actually going to come out from the very end and I'm just going to cut through that first. If I try to go all the way to the line, it ends up just tearing out an awful lot of end grain. So we go down in a ways, and I'm just going to work back gradually to that line. Same thing on the inside here. So I'll finish up a little bit more of that off camera. Just take this down a little bit and just show you kind of roughly what we do. Obviously trying to make this as square as possible. Ultimately, the key point here is that this surface and the bottom are the 2 points that hit. It could again have a slight belly in the middle. You don't want too much of a belly because it needs that surface to actually sit on. But you don't want to have a high point in the middle there. So I'm going to try to bring that across as square as possible. I'm going to rotate that around twice once I get this surface all done. Rotate that around twice, do the same thing there, and then use the framing square on the end to make sure that's good. We'll go through along this surface right now. One thing I like to do, so this cut here from this plane is flared out that way a little bit. This one's in a little bit. So I know that I want to bring this one in so that I don't have this high point in the middle. So I'm going to have to take that down a bit. So I'll go through, just because I really like this little chisel, I've got good control with it, I'll go through right by the top, and I'm trying to leave maybe the top 1/4 of an inch along the length here. Leaving that top 1/4 of an inch, the line that the saw cut, and just coming in and paring off just 1/4 of an inch below that. We can get that after. And then I'll come in with my 2-inch bar. And I can really pare a whole lot more off of that. Try to find the force I like to put behind it I don't have quite as much control with. So I like it if I can just focus on paring and staying 1/4 inch below that line instead of trying to also dictate where that 1/2 inch line is. So that's why I do the little guy first. And again, so like all these surfaces, I'm going for square here. I'll rotate this around. I'll do the same thing on the other side, and then I'll drag the framing square over it to make sure that it's not touching in the middle, and then it's just touching on the edges here. So I'm going to go through and do a bunch more of that handwork. I'll pause the video right now and kind of pick it up to show you where we leave off with that. But yeah, essentially just going through with these couple tools, chiseling and paring. So the old piece is now all roughed out. and ready to accept the new piece. Give me a little tour of that real quick. We've gone through and pared down the table. Again, I like to be able to drag my trim square along the length of it. Check for any high points. Looks good. There's probably 1/8 of an inch of belly in the middle. Same thing across the end grain here. Same thing, about 1/8 of an inch, 3/16 in the very middle there. This guy just ended up making pretty square. So I'm going to transfer those lines from this old piece onto the new one. I've gone through ahead of time my new post, my repaired post, sorry, wants to be 18 feet long. So I've gone through and done the math on my repair piece to figure out, and again, always making sure you're measuring to the shortest point of your old piece, what the longest point of the new piece needs to be to figure out that length. So I've gone ahead and figured out what that's going to be. I've added, this piece is actually, was already cut, so it's like 8 inches long, but always want to make that 2 or 3 inches longer than needs to be, just in case there's any mistakes or you need to recut something. And then if there's going to be a tenon on the bottom, making sure that you account for enough length to cut a tenon on the bottom afterwards. So I've gone ahead and oriented this the way that it's going to be in the building. This is going to be my outside face here. And on the bottom, those are my 2 reference faces. And I'm going to go ahead and start laying out the top here. So I want to double check, I laid everything out and cut my lines pretty well, but I want to go ahead and double check all of that stuff. Both the thicknesses of those various things and then this length here. There's always an inevitable amount of recutting that has to happen, kerfing and everything, but it's nice to dial that in as close as possible and get the repair piece as close as possible. One thing I worked around here before I turned the video on was kind of orienting this thing so that a couple of knot clusters are going to be taken out. They will be the part that gets removed here for the old piece. So I'm going to just did that ahead of time, and I'm just going to I'm going to start here, but I want to make sure that I've got enough length to be below that here. And again, I accounted for that in the overall length. So I'm going to start here with that all. And again, I'm going to go off this reference side here. So I'm laying out the reference side, and I'm going to go in, and this is the very end. So the very end is here. It's 2 to 4 inches. So I'm going to draw a line across. And this is probably going to be an easier video to see the layout of the scarf joint than cutting the old piece, just because of the new wood here. I'm going to make it mark at 2 inches, and I'm going to make it mark at 4 inches. When that was there, before moving it, make a mark at 2 inches here on the 2-inch bar, and then I can slide that down to that mark, draw a line from 0 to 2, and then a tick mark at 2. And I'm going to connect the dots to those 2-inch lines. I'm going to double check the length here, the overall length of the table. So this ended up being just under 31 15/16. So again, I'm going to burn an inch. I want to make sure I tell myself in my head I'm going to say 32 15/16. 32 15/16. I'm going to burn an inch. Mark 32 15/16. Down there. Again, the reference face. Come across from 4 to 6 inches. I don't actually know that yet. I'm just going to draw a line because I said I was going to, but I'm going to double check this first. And that is in fact 2 inches thick. And it is 1 7/8 inches long. So I'm going to go back here, I jumped the gun there, and I'm going to mark from 4 to 6 because it is 2 inches thick. And then I'm going to mark 1 7/8 inches for the shoulder cut. Slide my framing square to that 1 7/8 inches mark. And I'm going to mark from 6 to the edge of the timber. Draw a line from 6 to the edge of the timber, and then make a tick mark at 6. Connect the dots on 6. Get my straight edge. And connect the dots to that 4-inch line. There you go. And then this all goes away. You can see this knot here that I was working around. This line's going to come here and should be well below where the knot comes in. Next thing we're going to do, roll this guy over this way. It's good to check to see, hopefully one of these surfaces is square. This guy, there's about an 1/8 of an inch gap there. Also an 1/8 of an inch gap there. So I'm going to account for that in this piece when I roll this over. Sometimes one of them will be square, and you can use that as your starting point to lay out off of. But if they're both not square, we're just going to copy that. So again, make sure I'm in the right place there. So I'm going to draw that line there, and I'm going to mark 1/8 of an inch in on the other end. Now, I tend to have a little bit of dyslexia with these things, and I just did it wrong. So I marked in an 1/8 of an inch, but actually it wants to be longer, an 1/8 of an inch, so I'm holding an 1/8 of an inch there. Sometimes it's hard to talk through these things and think about what you're doing. So that is an 1/8 of an inch out of square, but then that will give me the correct line as I come around. For reference, I'm going to go ahead and lay out this next face in the same way that I laid out the other one. Guess we'll go ahead and do that on video here. So we'll go again 2 and 4 still, and good 2 inches long. So we got our mark here, which is again the shoulder. So I'm going to start with the end, and so I'm going to hold that at 2. I'm going to come across at 2 and 4. I'm going to slide to that 2-inch line. I'm going to go from 0 to 2, and mark 2. Connect the dots. Here we are, we're right at 32. Burn an inch, say 33. Two inches, and again, just over 1 7/8 inches there. So we're going to go from 4 to 6. Mark them both, 4 and 6. And then you have to put a mark here at 0 out on the edge there, and then I can just slide the framing square up. And mark from 6 to the edge. Mark it at 6. Dots. Orange line. Again, managed to lay it out so that a knot could be removed there. Like all joinery, it's good to kind of double check that stuff and think through all of it so that some of your critical joinery doesn't have a big old knot in it. Put that on top. And so because of the length in the two different tables, it ends up close to square, not quite, which is probably what that thing reads. So hopefully the new piece is pretty close to the old piece. But again, there's always an inevitable amount of recutting and kerfing to get it all just right. So there we go. I'm gonna go ahead and double check all that stuff, just make sure everything's right. I'll do that off camera, and then we'll get situated to cut the new piece. All right, so we're gonna get set to cut the new piece here. And just like the old one, I'm gonna go in, score my end grain first. Not as much to help see it here on the new piece, because it's a lot easier to see, but also just so that when I get there with the chain worcer, I don't realize that I didn't do it, and I have to put the chain worcer down to score these lines. So just like to get it out of the way at the beginning. So there's that. And I'm just gonna start with a 16-inch circular saw here, making a long rip for the table. Eye and ear protection. And again, I'm going to go for about half depth for this cut. One of the things I like to do, especially on that long rip, because there might be some ins and outs on the old piece, is to make sure that I'm leaving the line. Good strategy, kind of, you know, hard thing to do completely, but is to split the line. You know, if you've got a fine pencil line, hard to really, you know, see both sides of it, but it's always nice to leave just a hair of the pencil line, so you know your piece is at least thick enough, and can always take a little bit off after. So again, I just checked my depth to make sure I'm not cutting too deep. The depth isn't critical on this one because I'm cutting into the waist, but I want to make sure I'm not cutting too deep. And other table. Now we come in with the chain mortiser. Come in for that back side there, just set that there, make sure it's safe. I'm going to cut from this side because these pieces are oriented the same way that they're going to go. The new piece is going to go. I like to be able to cut with the chain mortiser with a 0 on the line, which means that I need to be on this side. Block the camera here, but I'm going to start all the way at the front. The depth doesn't matter too much. I'm going to come from both sides with this. But I'll put it down, you know, in the 6-inch range, maybe something like that. So I'm going to start all the way at the front. Just like the cut with the circular saw, I'm going to make sure that I leave the line, especially on these cogs. There's nothing worse than having a gap there, both for your structure, because the piece can move, and aesthetically. Just cutting in the middle. And now I'm at the back edge, which is the table. And here I'm actually going to swing. So I swing across there because of the arc of the circular saw blade. Isn't going to get all the way in there to the line. That cuts through that grain. And here comes the super gratifying part. We do the same thing. You can already see it now. It's starting to flap a little bit. Slide this guy this way. Again, starting at 0. Now for effect here, I'm going to start at the front this way, and I'm going to work towards the back, which is the table. When I cut all the way through at the table there, this piece of waste is going to just drop off because there's no fiber tying it together anymore. Drop that down. We'll go for the middle. Be very careful here. Can't quite see the front edge. It's easier if you go, calling that, I called that the back edge earlier. But it's easier if you go go this way with the chain mortiser, but since I'm going this way, I got to clear out the chips, but obviously you have to be very careful with the chain as I do that. And now I'm going to do the back mortiser. Again, swinging. Depth stop up, then hopefully, there we go. So just like with the old piece, we'll go ahead and lay out the end here so that can be done with power tools. Switch over. go ahead and mark that. Top surface here. And this is nice and clean, so again, I don't have to worry about the circular saw, big 16-inch circular saw moving around too much. I feel good about that surface. Right there. Now I'm going to cut in this direction, just to make sure that the majority of the base of the saw is on my piece and not on the waist. Grab the gauge and quarter. Come around to the end. Draw my marks on the end here. Which again, I could do just with the big L from the top. But I like to just make sure that in case one of those shoulders didn't actually measure 2 because of the old piece, you know, if it was 15/16 or something, that I'm just going off of my layout and not off of assuming that it's 2 inches. And I'm going to double check my depth. Go a little bit deeper. Stay just below that line as I cut across. Funky, but that'll work. That's good. Alright. So everything is roughed out. At this point, since everything is 2 inches, I'm just going to use my 2-inch bar for everything. I'm not going to bother with a smaller chisel, even on this inside corner here on the end grain. Especially with I'm using pine for the new wood here. It's relatively green, pretty easy just to come in, not go too deep, and then come around the corner. So I'll do some of that off screen here, but again, just going through chiseling, paring, using my lines. I did a pretty good job of leaving a bit of my line so I can still see it. So leaving my lines and then working to create either perfectly straight across, plain, or just a hair of a belly to it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on all these surfaces, give it a double check with the framing square, and then I'll come back to begin fitting stuff up. Now for the exciting part. This bit is it's kind of like Christmas, opening a present up. Get to see how it all fits together. So I've gone through and cleaned this guy, pared it all down, given it a double check. Again, going through, making sure it touches on the edges and just a hair of a belly right in the middle so it's not touching there for fit up, and so that as it dries and checks, the middle isn't going to push the joint apart. So I've gone through and done that on all surfaces. We're all good there. I'm going to attach this puller here to pull the joint together. This guy is a ratcheting chain binder that you would have for tying equipment down, chaining equipment down to a trailer. This is the smaller size. I believe I think they call it 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch chain. And so it comes with hooks on the end, a pin and a hook on the end that you can hook to your chain. I've gone to a metal shop, local metal shop, and I've had these feet made up, and then there's just a cotter pin that holds it in place. This was left in, so I'm just going through and extending it. Sorry. For attaching the feet, gotta make sure you have enough length to pull the joint together. So, opening that up. We're gonna rotate this, drop that on. Now, because I've got some extra thickness of the new piece on the bottom, it's on the sawhorse. The two pieces aren't in plane, so I'm just gonna go ahead with my quick clamps. Just pull the old piece up to the new piece. Just kind of hang it there. You want to go through and check to make sure that everything is relatively close in terms of thickness and that nothing is going to jam up. Sometimes necessary to add another clamp, but I think we're good. So that's all done, everything's in plane. I'm going to go ahead and attach the puller. Gonna get that centered there. I just use structural screws, timber locks in this case, 4-inch timber locks. Basically 4 of them in each foot to hold it together. Hold it on. And flip the dog here so it's going to pull. Got everything engaged. I'm going to pull the quick clamps off. Just adding friction. So it's going a little twisted right now, which is totally fine. We'll adjust that afterwards. Some of it now, actually. I've got a bunch of extra thickness, extra width in this piece, so I'm not too worried about hitting the new piece with my mallet. If I was close to the finish surface, I would. If I'm going to hit the old piece, I'll put a piece of plywood against it. Just because the small mallet does leave a pretty good mark there. Don't want to leave that on the face of the timber. So, more or less straight there now. Going for kind of visual straightness on the edge, but also hoping that my cuts are square. Because I can adjust if the new piece isn't totally in line with the old piece, I can just straight line it. I'll just snap lines to figure out how far that is cut on either side. And so here we are, we're pulled together. We're looking pretty good. So the part here, and we'll grab the phone and bring you in here to see. Now that everything's pulled together, got to go through and find the biggest gap. And so we're looking at solid, it's probably 3/37, almost 1/8 of an inch probably there. So these guys are all tight. So we're tight up there. And same thing, about 1/8 of an inch. And we're tight over here. So what that means is we need to kerf these surfaces 1/8 of an inch to create 1/8 of an inch gap there so that we can remove the 1/8 of an inch gap here. So ultimately just cutting everything so that the same amount of gap exists everywhere so that we can then pull it tight. So we'll go back and put the phone up above and we can start going through that process. We're gonna set to work kerfing these two surfaces here. So great thing about these pullers is you pull out the hairpin for cotter pin, tuck that in out of the way. I usually just tuck the hairpin out of the way somewhere. You don't really need that until I put the thing back together because I can just throw the cotter pin back in without that keeping it in there. But I've now released the tension on it. It's opened up the joint just a little bit. You know, you're able to pull the joint together more than the actual space, you know, that exists there because of the mechanical force of the puller. So once you release that pull, it does open the joint up just a little bit, which shows you, you know, what the actual shape of the two pieces is. So I've got a little bit more of a gap here than I do over on that side. So what I like to do in that case, I'm just going to cut a little bit from this side, try to nest. So what I try to do is to use the new piece as the guide for my pull saw here. I'll just let the saw ride down the face of the new piece, kerfing the old one very carefully. This is one of those things that's easy to get annoyed with, to get frustrated with the kerfing, to rush it. And it can be really easy to create too much of a gap or to create a crooked line there. And you end up really chasing your tail for a while, trying to get rid of that then. So it really pays to kind of go slowly with that, make sure you can see your line. So I'm only going to cut through that much from that side because it's very important never to cut a line that you can't see, especially when it's going to be visible in a nice repaired post. Set that down. Put a quick clamp on it so it doesn't keep rotating. So now that I've made that gap on the other side, on the far side, coming through, we go a little heavy on this side, tipping the saw back to me a little bit. And then I'm going to kind of pull it back as I get closer to that bottom. I'm not going to cut all the way through on this back side because I don't know how deep I am. And I think that I've already come deep enough when I was on that side. So the other hard part here is that inevitably all the sawdust that you're creating in your kerf ends up at the bottom. So you need to be very careful to kind of pull the sawdust out, also without going too deep here. It's really easy to get carried away and cut too deep on that shoulder of your new piece. And then you've created a kerf line that can't really get rid of because it's in your new piece there. So I'm good on this guy. I've got a little bit less of a gap there. It's more like a 1/16 of an inch. This whole process is probably going to take, 2 or 3 attempts at least. Yeah, so the blade of that guy is the size of the kerf. So I'm going to need to close this up that amount and then do it again. Create another one again. I do have, it's tight on that side, so I am going to plunge the Multi-Master in on that side. And that will be it. So same with the pull saw, I just rest the Multi-Master against the new piece. Carefully plunge. plunged in, up and down that line. That is the benefit of giving a little bit of a belly to the old piece, to this inside, to the mortise of the old piece here, is that I can kerf that a little bit and just use the multi-tool and know that it's closing up on the outside here on the edge, but that I've got maybe a little bit of room to play with in the middle. Sometimes it's necessary to push the joint back apart and then to get in there and actually pare down the inside there, because it will begin to hit at some point. But now I'm going to throw that pin back in there, go back into pull that tight, and then I back off. And it's closed up a bit, so we're gapped a bit here. It didn't close up all the way. There must be something holding it apart somewhere, but it did begin to pull that together. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the exact same thing. I'm going to kerf this guy. Now I can get the multi-tool in there. So I'm really only gaining, at this point I probably gained a 32nd, not quite a 16th of an inch, but I am gaining here. So I will just go ahead and do that same process again. It'll be a little easier now. That saw is really kind of just falling in the same line that I already made. But there's probably something somewhere in there now that is actually holding the joint apart. So I do want to make sure that I kerf it again with the handsaw. So again, you can see I'm just kind of going from the middle of the piece to the outside here, because I don't want to come through the other side. And plunge this again. There, do the other side. So we're also touching here. Probably what was holding it up. But for this, other half of this. So really there, I'm just using the pull to really just pull the chips out as much as anything, not to really cut. Now this surface here is actually, the inside face, but it's really only touching at the very edge here. If this was tighter, I would not do this upside down, because this is the surface that's going to be seen. And so as the joint gets tighter, I will probably roll this over. But at this point it's gapped, still almost 1/8 of an inch on the other side, so I know that the saw blade is riding in there. And I can just come that corner there, just on this plane. And actually, it seems like it just closed up a little bit. Just gonna run it through again. All right, so quite a bit better, super tight. Just a little bit less than a 1/16 of an inch there. We're tight again here. 1/16 of an inch here. So I'm going to have to go ahead and do that whole process one, maybe two more times. I'll go ahead and shut the camera off and just continue to tinker with that. But same process, just curving everything, either with the handsaw or the multi-tool. If necessary, what I'll do sometimes, again, if there's sawdust, seems like it's building up in the inside corner, take this guy, and I'll open this up 3/4 of an inch or an inch or so. I'm going to try and get in there blow the sawdust out, I'll take my little 3/4 inch chisel, especially on these inside corners here, where I actually, instead of cutting the old piece, I was cutting a new piece. So the outside is cut with a multi-master, but the inside is still longer. I'm going to go ahead and just pare that down a little bit, the end grain, just to make sure that's not holding me apart. Yeah, just continue to keep creeping up on getting all the different surfaces tight. Now we're going to peg the joint together. So remember, because we had some existing mortises here, we got some girt mortises, peg holes for here, and descending braces. We're going to use those peg holes to peg the joint together. These two pegs are going to wait until the frame goes up and those girts are inserted. So what I'm going to do is to draw bore, which is to offset the peg holes slightly. So I'm going to drill the peg holes in the new piece closer to the shoulder by an eighth of an inch or so, slightly over, to just suck that as tight as possible. And then I'll probably use a structural screw, a fully threaded screw up at the top here, just maybe 2 of them, just to keep things from pivoting, moving. But we'll also pre-drill these. They just won't go in until the frame goes up. So I'm going to use a Wood Owl, 1-inch Wood Owl drill bit. The Wood Owl has 3 cutting spurs on it. Just makes for a really nice clean hole. And so all I'm doing here is just chasing that hole, and just going until I feel that new wood. If I was doing this on a piece that didn't have these existing peg holes, I would use the drill stand, which is going to give me nice, perfectly square holes to the timber. Especially important if you can see both sides of the pegs and you want to make sure that the hole that it exits out on the other side is in the same position. But again, since I'm chasing existing peg holes, I'm not going to worry about it on these guys. All right, so those are all pricked. I'm going to go in and back out puller, pusher. And once that gets nice and loose, I've still left the hairpin out. I just take the cotter pin out. The puller's taken off. Just swing this guy over. Got my peg holes. A little deep on a couple of them, but not bad. It won't be seen. So usually if I'm using the drill stand again, I can set the depth on this, and I can set it so that only the lead screw cuts into the new wood. But here we just won't worry about it. So at this point, just to get these nice and straight and to make sure I can offset the hole like I want to, I will use a drill stand. And again, what I'm going to do is stay perfectly in line, side to side, but I'm going to move a bit towards the shoulder, 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 or so. The other really nice thing about the Wood Owl is that it cuts all the way through, but it doesn't blow out the backside. So you can feel when it stops. And then you can drill through from the other side. Drill stand just stops there. On the back side there'll be a little bit of a hole, and I'll just chase it back through. And again, these are the 2 that are really going to do the majority of the work, at least for the moment, of sucking the joint together. do like to every once in a while check and make sure that the drill bit is coming all the way through, so I can feel that screw tip once it stops spinning, of course. Don't like having to go back and re-drill it if it hasn't made it all the way through. So I'm going to roll that over, and I will just grab this guy to drill through from the back side. Roll it over one more time so you can see what's going on here. So I get this little hole. Again, this is the back side, so it doesn't really matter. In this case, this guy's going to get covered by wall sheathing, but other times they may be visible from all four sides. So, holes are all set. Now that I've got this thing apart again, I'm just going to go through quickly with the chisel, make sure there aren't any high points that kind of stayed with the Multi-Master. Especially with that draw bore, if there's a little bit of small stuff that's just been holding it apart, that last 32nd an inch or whatever, just going in now to clean that all up. The draw bore really pulls it all together, then get everything super tight. So again, I'm just going on the very inside corners, the spots where it might be hard to get the pulse off all the way down in there, or on the ends here where the Multi-Masters came in, an inch and a half or so. So everything's cleaned up. Double check the old piece as well. The old one, I like to grab that 3/4 inch chisel. Again, just go through inside corners, just knock out the little bits of sawdust. Do an eyeball, make sure that where it's going to touch is on the outside first, and that there isn't a little bit just inside the line that's holding it out. In this case, there's a little bit of a belly right there, probably just because of the angle that the multi-tool came in at. And it's just in there just a little bit, but just want to take that down so the very outside is touching, and then that doesn't hold it up. And then you can usually kind of sight down through, make sure there's no high spots in the middle. Looks good. Sawdust. And we're going to go in, put some end sealer on this guy. So that new wood is all sealed up. This is a Heritage end sealer. And this will just slow down the drying process. Hopefully reduce a bit of the checking that this is likely to still do. Ideally, the pine would be slightly dry. In an ideal world, I would have some cants of larger stock, 10 by 10, 12 by 12, that would then get resawn for a project. But most of the stuff ends up being fairly green. The stuff's about 2 months old. Try to do everything I can to kind of slow down the drying process, and it will be a while before it's actually an enclosed house. It's going to be another year and a half or something like that. Otherwise, I might try harder to get some dry wood. Generally for an unfinished barn space, I don't worry too much about it. Wood's wood, and it checks and it moves and it does whatever it's going to do. Obviously, want to make it look as good as possible. Like our limitations. So, all right. So I'm going to put this together. I'm going to put this upside down, back the way we started, so that my pegs are coming through. from the back to the front. And I did go ahead and, before I turned the camera on, I went ahead and ripped the bottom down so it's closer to its finished thickness. It's still going to need to get hand planed or beam planer over it to get it exactly the same. But it sits a lot closer now. So I'll put the puller back on, pull it together one last time. So just want to look through, make sure everything's lined up side to side. The peg will obviously pull it around a little bit if needed, but everything looks really good there. So I'm going to go ahead and drive those two pegs in. So I like to use a mini sledge, a little engineer's sledge for this. And I've got some ribbon pegs. Good friend Seth Kelly, who's a timber framer here in Vermont, likes to rive pegs, so lucky enough to get some from him just a week or so ago. Excellent stuff for draw bore. Goes in nice and easy, and then you can really feel the draw bore engage, which really works to suck the joint together. So as it's going in, those offset holes are really, pulling against each other, pushing against each other, and it really just is the perfect trick. So I like to drive the pegs through personally so that the tip sticks out the full amount, right to where the taper starts, and then I'll chop those off. And a couple screws. So these guys are SWG fully threaded screws, made in Germany, through Mighty Con Timber Connectors in British Columbia. That's who I get them through. So it's fully threaded. Got threads right up to the head of the screw, so it really works as a clamp to really hold the whole timber together, rather than or two pieces together, rather than just relying on the head. And so I'm just going to put a couple of these up at the top so that this thing doesn't want to rotate at all. One thing I want to be mindful of is that I still have to cut a girt mortise in here. So I'm going to do that after everything's together. And this is playing down to the right width and everything. But so that's going to be about 2 inches off of this peg. It's, I believe it's 4 inches tall. So I'm just going to go up into here with these guys just to make sure that I'm well out of the way of that mortise. And I'm also going to offset these guys from that peg hole, just so I'm not in the same parallel grain. And that's it. They drive really well. Hardwood sometimes they can be a little tricky. The screw might want to snap, but for softwood, they go right in. Pop the puller off. There's the hairpin. All right. So, our joint should be totally secure, super tight. And I'm just going to go in and I think with this guy it's close enough. Sometimes if there's a lot of extra waste, I'll go ahead and rip that with the circular saw, with 16-inch circular saw, which is what I did for this face. But this is close enough where I'm just going to take the beam planer to it and just plane it to match with the beam planer. Before I do that though, just going to go ahead and make a couple reference lines. And all I'm doing here is hooking onto the top of the post on the edge. This isn't critical. There's no joinery down here. There are the 2 mortises up here, but I have the actual width of the post up here that I can go off of on the other side here. It's not visible here, but this is really just visually just wanting to make sure that the new piece matches, is parallel with the old one. And you can see there's a little bit more to take off here than there is down there on this side. And obviously the opposite on the other side. But just nice to have a visual aid to figure out what to go to there. And same thing on this side. Extrapolating that point. Alright, so now we're just going to take the beam planer, do a little bit of video of this and then we'll shut it off. But I'm going to have it set on that surface. Start on this one. Especially with the green pine, fresh pine, this guy likes to get clogged up on the chip port here. Likes to get clogged up, so I like to go in with a stick here, try and get that all cleaned out ahead of time, and then sometimes we'll make sure that keeping that cleared out as I go. And yeah, so because there's more to take off on this end, on this face, I'm going to start down here so I can just do a couple extra passes and then shift it down the line. Let's do one there. Yeah, just gonna come hit this on this side. And one pass down the whole thing. take it off about a 1/16 of an inch with every pass. I've still got an 1/8 of an inch to go in a couple places, but closer to a 1/16 in others. So I hate to go too close and then run the risk of digging in with a planer. So at this point, I ditch the planer. And I will grab the hand plane and slick. We're just going to go through the last step of the process here, which is just going that last 1/8 of an inch, just bringing that down so that the two pieces meet up and match up perfectly. So I'm just going to go in just at first on a slight diagonal with the hand plane, just to really hog a bunch of it out. Again, just like with the beam planer, trying to make sure that I don't get too close because I don't want to, even with the hand plane, try to make sure that I don't dig into the old wood at all. But I want to get as close as possible, and I'll just finish that off with a slick. All right, so that's pretty close. Maybe a little bit more. Oh, we'll go just a little bit more. It's hard to know which direction we go from. Sometimes just trying to follow the dips and dives of the viewing on the old piece, but I also have to go with the grain. All right, that's probably good. I'm going to go in with the slick. And I go with different aesthetics, different finishes depending on the frame a bit. So since this is a hewn frame, basically just go in and kind of hand plane everything just to make sure I get rid of the saw marks on the new timber, and then just kind of rusticate it a little bit. Just hand plane and then just kind of rough it up with, plane coming in from different directions and trying to make things not perfectly smooth. Not necessarily to make it look like it's hewn, but just to kind of blend the two together, the new and the old. On a slightly newer frame, if there are sawn timbers, I also sometimes like to just get the sizes as close as possible, the new and the old, from the mill, and just really try to dial it in. A lot of times those frames are then more consistent than this guy is, in terms of the timbers all being the same size, and can get pretty close on that. And then try to really use the saw marks, the new saw marks, as the finish for the new piece there, just to have this readable repair of knowing that one timber is sawn from a, an 1860 circular sawmill, and the other is from a, 2020 Wood-Mizer sawmill. So you can kind of tell that from the saw marks. There, we got things pretty darn close. I'm going to go through, do some more hand planing on the base of it as well. Do some of that off camera, and get it all finished up. I'll also go in and what I like to do is induce some wane into the piece. So there's a good waney edge right here, especially right at the bottom where it comes into the new. And so I'm just going to go in and kind of create a sort of natural chamfer to it with a draw knife. A lot of times I will go in, rough it out with this, just to take out the material, and then I'll go back in with the hand plane to really round it off, just to make it look more natural. And just creating shape at the end there. And then just kind of drawing it back from there. Move it down the bottom, and then again, we'll keep going on this thing, and we'll have one last look at it when it's all done. Here we have the finished up post bottom. I've gone through and planed everything, used the slick to bring it all right down to the line, added the through mortise here for the girts, which again has the peg hole that's gonna peg the top of it together there. And yeah, the fake wane, some handprints on there, my hands are filthy. There you go, repaired post. D4. Thanks for watching the video.